May be unique among New World wine areas in that the vast majority of the really good vineyards are not monopoles. In other words, they're not owned and operated by one producer. And that gives us this tremendous opportunity to see, as we do in Burgundy, as we do in Piemonte, to see the cross-pollination between a vineyard site and several different ways, or in some cases, many different ways of making wine from that vineyard site. The different approaches, beginning with the way that the winemakers ask the vineyard manager to farm, and on through vinification and then blending, and how the strong characteristics of the vineyard, and all great vineyards have strong characteristics, how those characteristics are mitigated in some cases with blending from other sites. So we have a very illustrious panel. We're really thrilled to have three of Washington's premier winemakers here, from the middle on out. Chris Upchurch from DeLille Cellars, Mike Januik from, among other things, Januik Winery, and John Bigelow of JM. All of them use fruit from the KLIPSUN Vineyard, and they all use it in different ways. Representing KLIPSUN, we have Patricia, who co-owns the vineyard with her husband David. And she's going to tell us about this unique patch of land and what she's trying to accomplish, and really what kind of setting are we dealing with here. And then to hold these guys' feet to the fire, we have Paul Gregutt, who's the best wine writer in the Pacific Northwest and beyond, and Master Sommelier Michael Jordan, who has turned Disney into, I don't know if all of you were aware of this, but one of the great and most renowned wine cellars in America and the world. At the Disney company now, last time, I don't know, last time you were at Disney World or Disneyland, last time I went, I ate hot dog on a stick, I think, probably not. But Michael has turned it into a place to go for wine alone, which is saying something. So let's see how good he is at grilling these guys, though. To start, I'm going to just ask Patricia to tell us about the KLIPSUN Vineyard. One note first, we're going to taste in this order, just so everyone's on the same page. The 3 barrel samples first, so 1, 3, 5, followed by the 3 finished products in the same order of producers, 2, 4, 6, and then the mystery wines, 7 and 8. And the purpose of the mystery wine is, by then, I hope we'll all have a sense of KLIPSUN-ness, of what KLIPSUN fruit tastes like, what its characteristics are. We'll have gone through how these 3 guys have used those characteristics. And we'll all have made our own decisions on whether they use them wisely or unwisely.
Barrel samples are 1, 2, 3.
Oh, okay.
They changed the master.
They changed it all. All right.
They did what you wanted.
Scratch all that.
KLIPSUN Vineyard, it's a name that my husband and I came up with. We wanted something that was very northwest, and it means sunset in Chinook Indian jargon. We're on Red Mountain, which is at the very south end of the Yakima Valley. And we planted our vineyard in 1984. And in those days, it was 2/3 white and 1/3 red. And today we are 5/6, as my husband likes to be very specific, 5/6 red and 1/6 white. And we have Cabernet, Merlot, we have Syrah, and Malbec, a tiny little bit of Nebbiolo, and Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon. And we planted the varieties that we like to drink, should we have to end up making wine out of it all in the end. At this point, we haven't made any wine, although our daughter is having wine made from our fruit, but that's a whole nother story. We planted right next to Kiona Vineyards. And we were like the 3rd planting on Red Mountain, so it was Kiona, what is now Ciel de Cheval, and then our vineyard. And Andre Chalachev came up and tasted the fruit from Kiona and said that it was the best Cabernet that he tasted, certainly up in Washington at that time. And we planted our vineyard right next to them for that very reason. And the other person who really loved our vineyard was Walter Claw, who, as many of you may or may not know, was the father of Washington wine. He was the man who told us how we could get our grapes through the cold winters that we used to have. They're not quite as devastating today. We have obviously gone to a great deal of trouble to make our vineyard one of the top in the state, and we choose our winemakers very carefully. And one of the things that we do is we like to taste the wines that they may have made, or find out who they're using as a consultant, if they've never had any wine made. And then we work together, and Julia Cook, my vineyard manager, is also here today. And she and the different winemakers go through the vineyard. We pick where they're going to be in the vineyard, depending on their style of wine perhaps, or what they're actually, the varietal that they're going to make. Some people are only getting whites from us. Most people are would like more reds than we could even ever provide. I wish I could do double again, but we're restricted by water. As maybe some of you know, there is a lack of water in Washington. And so everybody has their designated rows, and they can go out to the vineyard at any time of the year, walk their rows, and they call Julia and discuss things, or they discuss it with me, and we go from there.
Thank you.
This is a 2007 Merlot from KLIPSUN Vineyard. It is 100% Merlot. No, I'm sorry, 100% KLIPSUN. 5% Cabernet from the vineyard as well.
You guys can all taste number one as we talk.
I do a single vineyard bottling of Merlot from KLIPSUN Vineyard every year. And this is final blend, and it will be bottled next month.
So this is 07.
This is 07. If I were going to say anything winemaking wise about KLIPSUN and about Red Mountain in general, is that people generally talk about the hardness of the wines from Red Mountain, and I don't think that our wines are ever hard from Red Mountain, but I think that we approach our winemaking differently than most of the producers who use Red Mountain fruit. Our macerations, and this is based on conversations that I've had with a lot of people who work with different vineyards up there. I think that our macerations tend to be different, and how we handle the wine throughout its life, I think, is a little different than what some people do.
Why, Mike, why use KLIPSUN as opposed to another vineyard? What do you see in it that says that's, and not only do you use it, you make a single site wine from it. Why?
Well, I'm always trying to make red wines that have lots of structure to them, but structure to me doesn't mean, necessarily a lot of astringency or hardness or anything like that. I think our wines have a lot of structure, but are also supple at the same time. And KLIPSUN Merlot
This is this wine. What makes it unique?
Well, first I'd like to ask a brief question about vintage, and your perception of the vintage overall, just briefly for the audience, because we haven't talked about that at all, and I think that's a big part, especially with specific sites like this, where you're using 100% fruit from a site, that's an exceptional site, but then you're more really at the vintage to vintage, what the heavens are going to give you.
No wiggle room. You can't say, boy, I need more mid-palate, I'll just go get it.
And we're not blending out to, achieve something,
Right.
And that's the whole point of it, but if you could just briefly.
About this particular vintage?
Yeah.
I can hardly remember last week.
It was a good vintage, okay.
The sun showed. The best, next year it'll be the best vintage I've ever seen because it'll be the wine we're selling. But Washington just has, in general, we have really good vintages. I just went through my 25th vintage, and there's only one vintage out of those 25 years that I really didn't like much at all. And the other ones I thought all were good to just incredible. And this is what that happens when you get 6 to 8 inches of rainfall a year, because it's rainfall during harvest that that ruins a vintage more than anything. But you know, 2007 was a little bit warmer than a lot of vintages.
That's what I was looking for, exactly. Thank you so much. We are blessed and fortunate to have a string of such great vintages in a row here. And with a site with such high quality as this site can produce, and then the artistic and stylistic differences of the amazing talents to my left here. But this is Merlot, and the thing that I find somewhat unique about this is because of this long, dry ripening season and the amazing hang time that you get here with the cool nights, you're developing some beautiful acidity. And I want to say that there's some beautiful acidity in this Merlot, along with a beautiful profile of not just black fruit, but red fruit too. I mean, there is black cherries, but there's Kirschwasser, and it's spicy, and tobacco, but not that green leafy kind that, you know, like when it's not really ripe. It's just a beautiful, almost like cigar wrapper tobacco, and that really complements the spice and the judicious use of oak. It's not overly oaky, but along with this beautiful acidity and super ripe fruit, not overripe, but beautifully ripe, there's a structure, but they're very powdery, mouth-coating kind of tannins that saturate your palate, and I got almost a minute-long finish on this wine. So, I mean, it's just a delicious Merlot, and a crowd pleaser right out of the bottle. I mean, this is a barrel sample, gang. It's not even a bottle yet. So can you imagine after a year of bottle aging when it really comes together and layers start to become apparent that aren't even really apparent yet? It's delightful.
Just Upchurch. This is
Well,
Cabernet.
I think part
This is Cabernet.
yeah, it's 100% Cabernet. I think it's from a Gamba barrel. We kind of really been enjoying playing with Gamba lately. It's done well with some of these powerful Red Mountain wines. Basically, with KLIPSUN, you know, KLIPSUN's one of the great wines, great vineyards in the world. You know, I have been blessed to be able to travel all over the world, from Margaret River to you name it, Germany, everywhere. And one of my goals in life is to walk these vineyards and say, because how can you make a great wine if you don't know what a great wine is? And you can't really find out what a great wine is unless you're trying a lot of great wines, and then you've got to go to these places and you got to say, what are you doing? What's going on here? And it doesn't even mean that you're doing the same thing at all. I can go to Burgundy, and I can go into the vineyards in Burgundy and look at what they're doing with biodynamics in Burgundy, and I can learn a lot, even though I'm sure in Washington State I'll probably never make Pinot. But it doesn't mean that I can't learn a lot in Burgundy. And it was apparent to me one of the first times that I went into KLIPSUN. I mean, Patricia's absolutely right. When I first came in and had to beg for grapes, I remember I had to drag David Lake along with me, because I think if I went in by myself, it was about in 95 or 94, something like that. If I didn't bring David in along with me, they'd kind of go, yeah, who's this guy? So, but I was smart enough to bring David with me, and got some fruit and started, you know, made some promises that we're going to treat it right, and it certainly has been a huge part, not just the little Cellars, but of so many different wineries around the world. I think people don't know how many Washington State wineries from all parts of the state not only use KLIPSUN, but use Red Mountain in their blends. But for me personally, I've always had to deal with the fact that, do I blend this, or do I create a terroir wine? I believe that KLIPSUN has a signature and has a uniqueness in its place. I've always felt that I could pick KLIPSUN out of a lot of tastings because it has that kind of deep plum and dark fruit kind of character, and just this massive structure that really stands out. And so I could look at that as being a terroir wine. But there's one thing that I always like to mention is that, and I think all three of us here are founding winemakers. It's one of the great privileges and honors that we have in a new wine growing region, is that we are founding winemakers of each winery that we're developing. And in being the founding winemaker, you have an obligation to give that winery kind of a style or kind of a uniqueness in the world. And unless you're making, you know, a million case winery where you're just trying to hit price points, which is great, and we need more of that in Washington State, I think. But really, in the boutique level, you have to be different from the guy next to you. It's the great lesson of the French. The guy across the fence, you've got to be different from him, or else it's price points. And nobody wants to get into that.
That's a great point.
So basically, you know, for me as founding winemaker of DeLille Cellars, I have always considered the number one most important thing is to create a style or an identity, just as Patricia's wanted a style for KLIPSUN. I've always wanted a style for Chaleur steak, and hopefully we'll be able to pick that up when we see that. So what do I do in KLIPSUN? You know, I've seen there's been times, quite frankly, where that's been the best barrel in my cellar. It's the KLIPSUN Cabernet. It's just been wonderful. And I could bottle that, put DeLille's name on it, put KLIPSUN's name on it, charge anything I want, and it would sell, because it's a wonderful wine. But it wouldn't be what we do at DeLille. It wouldn't be what, you know, that unique and stylistic wine that we're making at DeLille. It would be something that maybe other people could do, because we know that, what, 27 or 30 people buy, you know, grapes from KLIPSUN. And it wouldn't be what we were trying to do. I've always been a blender. I'm sure Mike will make a pun out of that somehow.
Finished wine, essentially. The first wine is essentially a finished wine. It's about to be bottled. The second wine is not only a different grape and a different vintage, but it has had a year less time in barrel. And so a couple of things pop right out. In wine number 2, you have a much cleaner, clearer expression of fruit. And by the way, if I had had a gong, Chris, I was going to bong it at 11:07. You were the first person to use the T word. We went 20 minutes before that showed its ugly face. But this is really what it comes down to is terroir, that horrible French word that everybody thinks is spelled terrier. But there is terroir in some vineyards in Washington. It is an expression that comes from the vineyard and the site and comes out in the wine. I personally think that the best, cleanest, purest expression of terroir, when it's done right in Washington, is 100% Cabernet Sauvignon. I did an article about that was eviscerated by the editors at the Wine Enthusiast, but the point was, when you get 100% pure Cabernet, and I understand being a blender, this to you is not a finished wine, but as a pure expression of Washington Cabernet from a great site, from an outstanding vintage, especially in a hot site, because it was a little cooler, and so you didn't have to fight the ripeness the way you do in some years. So I find that this number 2 is just an absolute glorious, fragrant fruit aromatics pour out of it, and it has all the qualities that Mike and Chris mentioned about the fruit that they get.
Michael Jordan, can you help us help the
Structure, I mean, but not, it's not biting tannin, but you know, it's there, and this wine's going to live for some time. But I think more the minerality, and I don't want to say earthiness because it's not, you know, there's this connotation of earthiness that I don't think that expresses what's in this glass. It's more, there's a minerality here, because you know, after all, these roots are going down deep into the ground and pulling up, not distilled water, but you know, an expression of everything that they bring in. And to me, you've got this purity of fruit, as you're saying, but there's something about the minerality in this site that's what I think, the high quality fruit, but the beautiful flavor and fragrance of the earth that shows this site is really what makes this a Grand Cru site. That's what,
In both of these first two
yes,
ones.
absolutely, in both of them. Even though the Merlot has the beautiful red fruit and the plush, soft plum and cherry, and this is just all about cassis and blackberry and black plum, just all day and pure and focused and very cool on the palate. And that's something else that I find from these sites, especially yours specifically, is there's kind of a cool mouthfeel to these wines. You know, whether it's a barrel sample or a finished wine, that to me, in a way, states that it is Washington wine, and more site specific from this area. That kind of cool mouthfeel is very unique, and that it's very highly sought after.
I started the winery back in 1998, and the first wine I made was KLIPSUN Vineyard Cabernet Sauvignon. And I have a lot of people who ask me, how the heck did you get into KLIPSUN Vineyard? You know, and there's this long list, and I tried everything I could through the front door with Tricia. I called her up, I tried to bribe her with cheese, I did everything I could do when I go over. And I said to her, I'd really love to make wine with your fruit. And she was very nice about saying no. And so like then I had the opportunity, and one of the things I'd like to share with everybody here is it is such a unique place to make wine in the world, because we're all friends. You know, Ben Smith sitting out here in the audience, Marty Clubb. These guys are all good friends who share the same vineyards. It's really fun. And these two guys up here are two of my favorites to work with. In fact, this is my brother-in-law. So, and Mike actually inspired me to get into winemaking originally. And one of the vineyards he told me I should get into was KLIPSUN Vineyard. And he said, good luck. So when I wanted to get into this, I called up Tom Hedges, another great wine person in this industry, and took him out to lunch and said, I'm starting a winery. I'd really like to get some great fruit. Is there any way I could get some Hedges fruit for this first vintage? And he said, God, I'd love to do that, but you know, I've got some expensive fruit that I'd love to sell to you. And I said, well, what's that? And he goes, well, I sourced some KLIPSUN Vineyard fruit, and it's more expensive than anything else. I hope you don't mind me saying that.
I think she loves it.
And so I don't need all of it. If you'd like to get a couple of tons of KLIPSUN through me, be happy to do it. And I said, that sounds great. So I signed up, and I saw Tricia about a month later, and I said, hey, Tricia, isn't it great I'm getting some of your fruit? And she said, what? And I said, yeah, Tom Hedges is selling me some of your fruit. And she goes, no, he's not. And I said, I don't understand. And she said, I have a complete control over who gets my fruit, and nobody subs my fruit out. And she said, you didn't know that, so I'm not going to penalize you, but I'm going to sell you the fruit directly. I'm not going to have you go through Tom. And Tricia and David represent about 22% of my total fruit now. I make 4,500 cases of wine a year, and KLIPSUN is the most important vineyard I've got in my portfolio. Not only because of the fruit, but because of the people. And you know, Mike touched on it with the name KLIPSUN. I want to give you credit. You are probably, in the state of Washington, one of the best PR people we've got. Everybody knows Tricia Gillis. She talks so highly of this state and of the wines that are made from her vineyard, and she's really making a big difference in how we're perceived worldwide, and it's awesome. The other thing that KLIPSUN did a few years ago that I think really made a difference in the wine that you're tasting today, this barrel sample, is she brought on Julia, who is the vineyard manager, and Julia's done a phenomenal job of going through and really improving something that was great to start with. So, and that's a real trick.
Stand up, Julia. Ways. I know Jim does a lot of things with irrigation to fine-tune tannins in his vineyard. And I know that you know, there's so many things. It's so important in the process on tannins too. You may or may not know that 75% of the tannins are actually in the seeds of the grapes. And so how you process the seeds, and how hard you squeeze, and all the, I mean, so many things go into it that really to sit there and say Red Mountain has harsh tannins, I think is really missing the whole idea. I think if unchecked or made by, you know, somebody that's a little bit newer to the field, I certainly believe, or if you bring it in too early, and you know the tannins haven't developed at all in the grapes, I think that you certainly can create a wine that has harsh tannins out of Red Mountain. I don't think there's any question about that. But I also don't think that that has to be. And I think that as we get better and better with Red Mountain grapes, we're finding that we can actually make very polished, very ripe tannin, very you know, very elegant wines.
Well, Randy Dunn, who knows a thing or two about tannins, makes a wine off Red Mountain called Feather, right? Feather? As part of the Long Shadows project. And he works with fruit on Howell Mountain. And when I spoke to him about the Red Mountain tannins, he said, boy, you know, you're known as a guy who will let tannins go where they're going to go. How do you tame the tannins on Red Mountain? He said, what tannins? So it's you know, if you have a firm hand.
We measured the tannins on our Grand Seal vineyard, you know, and they're right in the middle.
Well, Mike Januik has a reputation around the state as renowned as anybody's. If he wanted to walk into any vineyard in the state, I would imagine, and said, I'd like some fruit to blend in with my KLIPSUN, there's not a vineyard manager or a vineyard owner who would turn him down. And yet, he has opted with this wine to go 100% single site. So let's taste number 4, and Mike, let's talk about the finished wine and
hardest thing. I think that a lot of times when people start making wine in Washington, they look at how wine is made in other parts of the world and don't give a lot of consideration to the unique fruit that we have. And I know that for the first couple of years that a lot of people ferment, they'll look at a place like Bordeaux and go, well, we need to macerate for 4 weeks because that's how long you macerate in Bordeaux. And so I've encountered a lot of people whose first vintages tend to be pretty hard wines, and it's because they've adopted somebody else's practices with regard to maceration. But when we make this wine, usually isn't macerated for more than 7 days, and we taste the wine a number of times each day, and we pump our wines over. And we don't have a formula for how long we pump anything over. We go through every tank every time we do a pump over, and come up with a length of time after we taste each wine. And there are times during maceration that we're pumping over a couple times a day, and then any given day we may say, let's cut it back to 1. And you know, we've been doing it for 7 minutes. Let's do it for 4 minutes today. And I mean, we will even taste a wine at the end of the day and say, let's not wait till tomorrow to drain it off and press it off.
so the trick then to managing tannins is a firm hand and
to be
nimbleness.
tasting, yeah, you've got to be tasting a lot. I think that you need to taste your macerations multiple number of times each day, and then when you press your fruit off, we only press to 0.4 bars, which you know is pretty low pressure, and our press cycles for our reds are usually 20 to 30 minutes. And even when we're pressing, we're out there in the pan the whole time tasting, and at a certain point, we say, okay, it's time to stop.
You know, I'm just tasting through this. I mean, I'm in love with this wine, and I think what I do love about it, one of the things that contributes to it is the firmness of it. And I mean, to me, anybody who's drinking high-end California Merlot gets a taste of this will never go back, because there's a resonance here. There's a seriousness to this, which is almost old world. You know, the style's not old world, but the firmness and the seriousness is old world. Paul, when you take a I mean, switch that around a little bit. Give me your thoughts of its in the context of it, this wine and its Washingtonness. And
Well,
its
yeah. in terms of its Washington-ness, and many winemakers have told me, the standard practice in California, for example, as well as Bordeaux, is you blend Merlot in to soften the Cabernet. In Washington, you blend Cabernet in to somewhat add a vertical structure to the Merlot, but the Merlot on its own has such substance and depth, as you pointed out. Washington Merlot, and I've been tasting some of the pricier California Merlots lately, and even at the very pricey end of the spectrum, you know, wines costing 3 times what Mike is asking for this wine. They don't have that kind of grip. So the Washington part of your answer is the grip. The KLIPSUN part of the answer is what people have been saying. I think it's the quality of the tannins, the way they're managed, and that's where the winemaking really has a role. Winemakers are generally so modest. Oh, it's all done in the vineyard. Well, it's not all done in the vineyard. A lot of it's done in the winery, and oftentimes screwed up in the winery. But when it's done right in the winery, then you get these beautiful polished tannins.
And this is, Mike, this is 95.5 as well, or I mean, tasting this, I would have thought it was 15% Cabernet, maybe 20% Cabernet, for exactly the reason Paul's saying. There's a firmness to it that you're just not going to get in Merlot. I mean, I guess you'll get it in Pomerol, you know, and there's some Tuscan Merlots where you'll get it. But
we'll take Patricia as a.
That's not 3 times.
How many bottles of Januik Merlot could I buy for 1 bottle of Patricia?
While we were talking about tannins, please let's not, I don't want anybody to think that anybody on this panel thinks that any of these wines are overly tannic. The tannins managed beautifully. They're so well balanced. And even though they're big wines, there's big fruit, and there's big ripe tannin with a nice soft attack and beautiful big oak, but it's really well balanced. So I think as time goes on and they polish up even more, you're gonna have some just incredibly beautiful wines to drink like this, right?
And this is ready.
Yeah, this is.
Can we have this with lunch? I mean, this is.
You know, there's another point to make winemaking wise that I think is important. People always talk in places like in California about doing cold macerations and things like that. The problem that we have in Washington quite often is that our must is too cold when it comes. What I think is too cold is, especially if you're picking in October, and you've got 2 choices. You can inoculate it and let it sit there on its skins for a lot longer before the fermentation really becomes an active fermentation, or you can do what we do. We have all of our tanks set up so that we can either warm the must or cool the must. And we make a really conscious effort after day after the wine is inoculated to get the temperature up to a certain point, because we want our wines to get into an active fermentation earlier. We don't want the wine to sit on its skins for a week or more before you really start seeing signs of fermentation. And I think for us that makes a big difference.
So it is interesting to hear everybody's techniques here. Mine's a little different. I actually, because of KLIPSUN Cab, I bought 2 big 1,000-gallon open-top French oak fermenters from Terranceau 3 years ago, and I really like fermenting this cab in these oak tanks. I think it just adds a beautiful creaminess to the wine. I think it actually helps to work with the tannin, and I really truly believe tannin is the soul of a wine. If there's no tannin, it's soulless. So what I'm looking for in this wine is bringing that beautiful tannin from KLIPSUN in, and then that's 70% KLIPSUN Old Vine, 1984 planted cab, with 30% Ciel de Cheval Cabernet Sauvignon blended. So just what you were talking about earlier. And I think what the Ciel de Cheval cab does is bring in a nice softness to it, but it still has tannin. And I think Ben Smith is one of the people I know works with CL all the time on the way their cabs are grown, and I really love your wines, and I've learned a lot from kind of tasting your wines and seeing how you blend it over time. So I like this blend. It's 100% cab, and Paul, you were talking about really being true to a varietal. I do 100% Merlot with KLIPSUN, Kiona, and Ciel de Cheval all blended together. That's 100% Merlot, and I do this Cabernet Sauvignon as 100% cab.
So what's the vineyard breakout on?
About 70% KLIPSUN, 30% Ciel.
So you get your blending, your wiggle room, not from varieties, but from site.
You know, it depends on the wine. I do it both ways. But on this particular, for Red Mountain, I've been very true to the varietal.
Anyone out there want
You know, there's great cabs in Washington State. The thing about, I mean, journalist, critic, everybody, you know, I can't tell you how many times guys like Pierre Ravani have told me that if they were going to buy vineyards anywhere in the world, they'd buy a Cabernet vineyard in Washington State. And it's because the Cabernet is so outstanding here. It is world-class and can be compared anywhere in the world. And we've made wines. I mean, I don't think Alex is here today, but we all know what Alex has done with a varietal Cabernet at Placida Creek.
Alex Galitz at Placida Creek.
And you know, I refer to all these wines, Mike's and everybody's, you know, as, you know, if you're a Cabernet fan, you've got to love these wines. I mean, they're just like taking a bath in Cabernet. They're just such delicious, expressive, beautiful Cabernet fruit, you know, and I can't overemphasize how wonderful these wines are.
So give us the percentages in this wine in terms of variety breakdown and site breakdown.
Well, this is not this wine. This is not an expression of pure Cabernet fruit. It's not what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, but what is it? 'Cause it's really good.
It's hopefully you see the wisdom in what we're trying to do, and that it is 65% cab, about around 25% Merlot, around 8% Cab Franc, and around 2% Petit Verdot. And when I look at all these incredible, just as Cabernet is amazing in Washington State, Petit Verdot is just this kind of magic elixir that at 2% just takes everything and just kicks it up into a whole nother level. Why wouldn't I use that? Why wouldn't I use that in a blend? Why wouldn't I use the depths and layers of the Merlot or you know, Chinon is one of my favorite places in the world. Why wouldn't I use the aromatics of a Cab Franc if I could somehow interject that into a wine? I mean, I realize that, you know, on one hand you have kind of a Tuscan 3-item dish, and on the other hand you've got a mole with 47 different ingredients. And you might ask yourself which one's better. I couldn't tell you that. What I can tell you is that this is what I'm doing, and I can tell you what KLIPSUN does to it too, because although KLIPSUN can stand on its own as a balanced wine, as a wine with its own expression and its own terroir, in a blend, KLIPSUN just kicks everything up to a whole new level. It's just like putting nitrogen in a race car or something. It just really just lifts up the tannins, the structure, the power, the right, all the things that are great about Cabernet. When you talk about, when people ask, well, why do you blend all these? Why do you blend Cabernet? Why is that in there? Well, Cabernet is for power, grit, rightness, structure, strength, all those things, and KLIPSUN just like, bam, does that to the blend. And I can tell you that many, many times that if I took KLIPSUN out of the blend, I would bring diminishment to the wine. And that's what I base everything on. I look at, I'm trying to be a builder. I'm trying to build a wine that's a little bit unique in the world, and it's a little bit DeLille style. If I can do that, then, you know, it doesn't matter what else I do. If I can do that, if I could be the best Chaleur state maker in the world, then it doesn't matter what else I do. It's just, I just want to be the best Chaleur state maker.
So I'm going to ask Michael to talk about this wine in particular and whether or not he gets KLIPSUN-ness out of it, and then Paul to talk after that about the three different approaches and how they strike you taken together. So Michael, this wine in particular?
This wine just has a tremendously beautiful equilibrium, and intensity, that's the word, intensity of fruit and floral component. Layering, not only just beautiful aromatics and finesse, but on the palate, it's so silky and satin, but with layer and layer and layer of fruit and flowers. You know, those beautiful purple flowers from the Cab Franc and the complexity of layers, and then that kind of rocky minerality shows through, but this is beautifully well balanced, delicious, delicious wine. And I'm really excited about it because I haven't tasted it before. And I'm thinking it's a 2006. And what we have to look forward to as this wine begins to age even further and become even more finesse in the layer, it's so well focused and elegant, but I can't tell you specifically the KLIPSUN-ness, because it's so very different than the tannin structure that we got in the other barrel samples and the other wines. So to me, it's that rocky minerality and that cool mouth feel and the beauty, just the beauty and purity of the fruit. I don't have a scientific.
That's it.
I should say this has a lot of Cellars in it, which is across the way. A little bit of our own Grand Seal vineyard, which is next to Seal, and the Petit Verdot and Cab Franc are both from Cellars. So it really is mostly a blend. There may be a little.
It's a Red Mountain blend.
It's mostly Red Mountain, and it really is mostly KLIPSUN and Cellars.
Paul?
Well, when you're looking for the particular stamp of a particular vineyard, I didn't mean to say that 100% Cabernet is the best wine. What I meant to say is it's the best way to read that vineyard.
In Washington?
Well, I think Washington can do it.
In Washington?
And California can do it in a much more limited way. There's very little old vine cab in California anymore.
Not very little. Percentage-wise, there's a lot more young
A
stuff.
lot of it got phylloxera right out. As far as these three wines go, I mean, they're all just very beautifully made wine. The Merlot, as you were saying, is a picture-perfect Washington Merlot from an excellent vintage, excellent site. One of the things you can do, and you can play these games forever, is why wine never runs out of things to fascinate.